Welcome to Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha, a podcast shared by David Roylance. This podcast is dedicated to guiding you to completely eliminate the discontent mind and the suffering it causes by attaining enlightenment. Learn and practice the teachings of Gotama Buddha that will guide you to fully attain a peaceful, calm, serene, and content mind with joy. To support this podcast, visit patreon.com/supportbuddha or visit buddhadailywisdom.com, where you will discover a full range of courses, retreats, and online learning resources to assist you on the path to enlightenment. Now, here's our teacher to share more.
Sawadee Kap. Hello and welcome to Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha. Today is our Pali Canon and English study group where we study the words of the Buddha. We're in Volume 4, chapters 21 through 31. Today we're going to be studying the actual words of the Buddha and helping you to learn what he's actually teaching in his own words, because it's the words of a Buddha that's going to lead to enlightenment and help you to understand what the true path to enlightenment is. A Buddha is laying down the lights along the sides of the path to illuminate it for everyone else to be able to learn, reflect on those teachings, to independently verify them, and then to practice them. And as you do so, you'll see the condition of your mind and your life improve. So welcome to all of you guys, whether you're joining for the first time or you've been joining regularly. Today we're covering 11 chapters in our book series, so I'm going to move right into the study part of the class rather than actually doing our meditation like we'll typically do. So I'll go ahead and start with this chapter 21, and I'll read this chapter and then I'll share some teachings on the chapter, and then I'll open up to any questions that you might have related to the chapter itself. You can ask questions by putting those into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom. In the comment section, I'll be able to see your questions and be able to answer those. If you are in Zoom, you have the added ability to raise your hand and ask any questions or follow-up questions directly. So the title of this first chapter that we're studying, chapter 21, is Awaiting His Time Mindful and Clearly Comprehending. Monks. A monk should await his time mindful in clearly comprehending. This is my instruction to you. And how, monks, is a monk mindful? Here, monks, a monk resides reflecting on the body as body, dedicated, clearly comprehending, mindful, having put away craving and displeasure in regard to the world. He resides reflecting on feelings as feelings, mind as mind, mental objects as mental objects, dedicated, clearly comprehending, mindful, having put away craving and displeasure in regard to the world. It is in such a way that a monk is mindful. And how, monks, does a monk exercise clear comprehension? Here, monks, a monk is one who acts with clear comprehension when going forward and returning, when looking ahead and looking aside, when drawing in and extending the limbs, when wearing his robes and carrying his outer robe and bowl, when eating, drinking, chewing his food and tasting, when defecating and urinating, when walking, standing, sitting, falling asleep, waking up, speaking, and keeping silent. It is in such a way that a monk exercises clear comprehension. A monk should await his time mindful in clearly comprehending. This is my instruction to you. Monks. While a monk resides thus mindful and clearly comprehending, diligent, dedicated, and determined, if there arises in him a pleasant feeling, he understands thus, there has arisen in me a pleasant feeling. Now that is dependent, not independent. Dependent on what? Dependent on this very body. But this body is impermanent, conditioned, dependently arisen. So, when the pleasant feeling has arisen in dependence on a body that is independent, conditioned, dependently arisen, how could it be permanent? He resides reflecting on impermanence in the body and in pleasant feelings. He resides reflecting on vanishing, reflecting on fading away, reflecting on elimination, reflecting on letting go. As he resides thus, the underlying tendency to crave in regard to the body and in regard to pleasant feelings, is abandoned in him. If he feels a pleasant feeling, he understands it is impermanent. He understands it is not held to. He understands it is not excited in. If he feels a painful feeling, he understands it is impermanent. He understands it is not held to. He understands it is not excited in. If he feels a neither painful nor pleasant feeling, he understands it is impermanent. He understands it is not held to. He understands it is not excited in. If he feels a pleasant feeling, he feels it without holding on to it. If he feels a painful feeling, he feels it without holding on to it. If he feels a neither painful nor pleasant feeling, he feels it without holding on to it. When he feels a feeling terminating with the body, he understands, I feel a feeling terminating with the body. When he feels a feeling terminating with life, he understands, I feel a feeling terminated with life. He understands, with the breakup of the body, following the exhaustion of life, all that is felt, not being excited in, will become cool right there. Just as monks, an oil lamp burns in dependence on the oil in the wick, and with the exhaustion of the oil in the wick, it is extinguished through lack of fuel. So too monks, when a monk feels a feeling terminating with the body, terminating with life, he understands, with the breakup of the body, following the exhaustion of life, all that is felt, not being excited in, will become cool right there. All right, so let me help you guys understand what the Buddha is sharing here. He's sharing quite a lot in this just page and a half, 2 pages worth of content. The first thing that he's sharing here is he's talking a bit about right mindfulness, and he shares this in the Eightfold Path as well. But here he's bringing in right mindfulness because he's also going to talk about right concentration or clear comprehension. Remember, right mindfulness relates to those 4 foundations of mindfulness. Generally, mindfulness can be thought of as awareness of mind. You need to develop awareness of mind because if you're going to move to this mental state where the mind is peaceful, calm, serene, and content with joy, you need to eliminate certain unwholesome qualities and arise certain wholesome qualities. So you're going to need to know with awareness what is in the mind, what are the wholesome qualities and what are the unwholesome qualities. So with breathing mindfulness meditation and practicing mindfulness in daily life, you're constantly working on trying to maintain your mindfulness and awareness of what's in the mind. So as you see something unwholesome, you can apply right effort and cut that off, let it go, and work to eliminate it out of the mind more and more. And then as you see wholesome qualities, either that are in the mind or that you need to cultivate, you can apply right effort to cultivate those wholesome qualities, maintaining them, not allowing them to fade. So this mindfulness or awareness of mind gets deeper when you understand the 4 foundations of mindfulness, which is explained in the Eightfold Path and other places of the teachings of the Buddha, like right here, where he's talking about that a monk or a student reflects on body as body. This is the bodily sensations and understanding the bodily sensations associated with discontentedness, that as discontentedness is arising due to craving, desire, attachment, that there's going to be some bodily sensations associated with that. And you would like to be able to cut off and let go of any arising discontentedness right there as a bodily sensation. But if you miss it there, it's going to become a feeling, and you can also cut it off there as well. And the more you get awareness of your mind and you get better at cutting off and letting go of arising discontentedness, you will be able to cut it off as a bodily sensation. But these feelings are going to come into the mind because your mind's not fully trained and you don't have full awareness of mind, and you need to accumulate more benefits in your breathing mindfulness meditation and in daily life to be able to observe those bodily sensations and cut it off there. So if it becomes a feeling in the mind, try to cut it off there, and you can even redirect the mind to something else. So if you're watching TV, the news comes on and you start feeling irritated. You notice the bodily sensations, you can't cut it off there. It becomes a feeling in the mind where the mind's now irritated. Just get up and walk away and go do something else. Or if you need to cut off the TV, cut off the TV. Or if you're getting messages from somebody, and when you're getting messages, perhaps there's this irritation that is arising. Maybe you need to step away from the messages, or maybe you need to even just ignore the messages or block the individual. Knowing that, yes, those painful feelings that you're experiencing of irritation is being caused by your own craving, desire, attachment, but sometimes it makes sense to just move on from a relationship, or just cut off and let go by redirecting the mind towards something else, taking a walk, taking a bike ride, or something like this. As you gain more control over the mind, you won't need to do those things, but for a period of time, you're going to need to do that. Perhaps months or years, you might need to do that as you're developing and accumulating the benefits of breathing mindfulness meditation and your practice of daily life. Because if you miss it as a bodily sensation or feeling, it then becomes to the point where it's affecting the condition of the mind, where you're going to notice for multiple hours or days or even weeks or more that the mind is being affected by this contact that's coming through the sense spaces, which is what we explored in previous chapters within this book. So if you're taking in content through the sense spaces, it's going to arise this bodily sensations based on the cravings that are in the mind. And getting to cut it off there is saving yourself a whole lot of challenges and difficulties. But sometimes you can't. You need it to cut it off as a feeling because you're still working on your mind. And then if you don't cut it off there, it's going to affect the condition of the mind more long term. And then it's going to keep feeding these mental objects. Like in the case of irritation, it would be this ill will. So you're working to break up the ill will through other teachings like loving kindness meditation and applying loving kindness through your intentions, your speech, and your actions. So here the Buddha is describing mindfulness and making sure that students understand right mindfulness as bodily sensations, being aware of those, being aware of the feelings as they come into the mind, being aware of the condition of the mind, and these mental objects that exist in the mind, because that's the whole life cycle that discontentedness is taking. So if you can understand that, then you can get ahead of the curve, because as soon as you experience the bodily sensations associated with conditions, feelings that are arising, you can take action. And if you've accumulated enough benefits, you should be able to cut them off and let them go there. But of course, you need to build up to that. Then the Buddha is talking about clear comprehension. This is where he's talking about right concentration. If you remember back to the Eightfold Path, in the Eightfold Path, he's just talking about the results of putting together all the facets of the Eightfold Path, and he describes the jhanas and what you're going to experience as the mind's moving through the jhanas. But here in other places, he's actually describing how to practice the step of right concentration, because in the Eightfold Path he doesn't explain how to practice it. He's explaining the benefits of the jhanas, and that's putting together all the other steps. But here in other places he talks about this singleness of mind. He's not using those words here, but he's describing how to practice singleness of mind. In other teachings he uses the language of singleness of mind, and it explains to practice clear comprehension and concentration by practicing singleness of mind. You're doing that in meditation when you're focused on the breath. You're trying to focus just solely on the breath, and when the mind moves off the breath, you're cutting that off, letting it go and coming back to the breath. But in daily life, where you see your mind wanting to crave and crave and crave and do multiple things at one time, this is where you train the mind to be able to do just one thing at a time and practice singleness of mind. And that's what the Buddha is describing here when he says, a monk is one who acts with clear comprehension when going forward and returning back. So you have full awareness and concentration of going forward and going back. When looking ahead and looking aside, when drawing in limbs and extending limbs, when wearing his robes and carrying his outer robe and bowl, when eating, drinking, chewing his food and tasting. There's places where he talks about this, that when you're eating, you're just eating and that's it. Or when you're drinking, you're just drinking and that's it. Or when you're chewing your food, you're just chewing your food and that's it. Rather than trying to do multiple things strung together and allow your mind to rapidly cycle, he talks about practicing singleness of mind and just doing one thing at a time. So when you're eating, if you're also looking at your iPad or your phone, you would like to cut that out, because oftentimes when you're just eating, maybe alone, you feel bored. but that's because of the craving. If you just turn to a device like an iPad or a phone, you're not going to eliminate the boredom because the mind is just craving for some kind of stimulation. So you need to train the mind to get used to just eating and being content with that. And of course, you're going to be bored and you might be lonely as you're starting to do this, but you break through this wall and more, you work through this. And now as you're working through this craving, desire, attachment, you'll ultimately get to the point where there's no boredom and no loneliness anymore. And you'll have this clear comprehension and this concentration because you've been refining your practice to practice singleness of mind. He's talking here about when defecating and urinating, like only doing that, right? If you're urinating or defecating and you're using your mobile phone at the same time, this is why you might have a delayed reaction that the body isn't defecating properly or is having trouble urinating. Or this is also why some people drop their phones in the toilet and damage their phone, right? Or they have all kinds of difficulties in that regard because they're trying to do more than one thing at a time. But the Buddha is explaining to you to just do one thing. And again, if you're bored while you're defecating or urinating, that's because of the craving, desire, attachment. Turning to your mobile phone isn't going to solve the boredom. You got to get rid of the craving, and then you'll be able to eliminate the boredom and loneliness. And you'll notice that you'll urinate and defecate more readily. The body will do what it needs to do because the mind's not overactive looking at the phone or an iPad or a magazine or newspaper or something else. But if you put in all this stimulation and have contact with a phone, iPad, newspaper, magazine, or something like this, you're urinating and defecating, your body's going to be trained to take a really long time. You need to train the mind, and thus the mind then is the boss and the body's the employee. The body will follow along, and you'll find it very easy to urinate and defecate. You won't be there for so long, spending all that time. So there's more here as well that the Buddha's talking about, but he's mainly getting to singleness of mind, which is what he talks about in other teachings as well. Let's see. He's also talking here about how when pleasant feelings arises, that as it arises, you know that it arises in you, that you need to be aware that that pleasant feeling is coming. Because oftentimes if you're just chasing, you're not realizing that the pleasant feeling is arising. If you continue to allow the conditioned pleasant feeling to arise, it's only a matter of time before you have painful feelings. So to get away from the painful feelings, you need to get your arms around these conditioned pleasant feelings. As long as you allow the mind to experience the conditioned pleasant feelings, as soon as those conditions change, your mind's going to end up in the painful feelings. So if you're not attending to the pleasant feelings and being observant of those and cutting them off and letting them go before it actually becomes a feeling, then you're just going to keep experiencing the painful feelings over and over. And that's why the Buddha says, now that is dependent, not independent. It's dependent on craving. That's what it's dependent on. The mind is experiencing the pleasant feelings because of the craving, desire, attachment. There's a whole lot more that the Buddha's explaining here. And then here eventually he gets into explaining that eliminating craving in regard to the body is going to eliminate these pleasant feelings, these conditioned pleasant feelings. Remember, an enlightened being is experiencing unconditioned happiness and joy and peace. There's no conditions that need to be met to experience those because the mind has been fully trained to no longer form conditioned pleasant feelings. Conditioned feelings based on some condition in the world that is impermanent. And thus you're setting yourself up with sabotage there, because as soon as you allow your mind to experience inner feelings based on some condition, that condition's going to change, and now you're going to be right into the painful feelings. So there's more that he talks about here, but I'll just turn things over to you guys and see if there's any questions on the thing that I read or anything that we've been talking about here. You can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, and I'll be pleased to help you. And for those of you guys in Zoom, I apologize. I see that I didn't have the chapter displayed as I was reading it and teaching it. So you should be able to see that there now. All right, it looks like we have a question here in YouTube from Bruce. He says, I am a little confused. If we stay mindful all the time to what we are doing every moment, when is it okay to think and plan? For instance, planning when and how to do daily errands and activities. So what you're describing, Bruce, is mindfulness, right? So what you're thinking of thinking and planning, while you're thinking and planning, you would like to be aware of the mind. So if you're getting ready to plan something for the future, you would like to have awareness of mind. Is your mind angry? Is it frustrated? Is it irritated? Are you having other unwholesome thoughts come in the mind? Are you planning to get back at somebody? Are you planning to exercise your ill will? If you have mindfulness, you can be aware of that. And now you realize, no, I'm not going to do that. That's really unwise. I'm going to cut that off. I'm not going to do that unwholesome thing. Or if you have some wholesome thoughts where you're planning a holiday or vacation for your family, you can have mindfulness or awareness of your mind while you're doing this. So you can practice mindfulness all the time. And the Buddha teaches this, that you should always be practicing mindfulness, that mindfulness is always useful. If you're not practicing mindfulness, then you're not going to be aware if there's wholesome qualities or unwholesome qualities in the mind, and you'll end up making unwise decisions. So that mindfulness, even while you're planning and thinking about different things, that's the awareness of the mind. Be aware that you're having a thought about planning something in the future. And now what am I going to plan? Is it to get back at somebody in revenge? Or is it to take my family on a holiday? Oh, okay, well, if it's revenge, let's cut that out. It's unwholesome. Oh, I'm going to be planning to take my family on a holiday. Wonderful. Let's plan this. Let's talk about it. So that mindfulness is what you're talking about, is that you would like to have that awareness of mind in all aspects of what you're doing in daily life. Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions here in Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom. So let's move on to the next chapter. And just to remind all you guys in Zoom, if you would like to volunteer to read, you're welcome to volunteer any of these chapters to read. All right, so this next chapter is chapter 22. It's titled, Nothing is Worth Adhering to. Then a certain monk approached the perfectly enlightened one and said to him, Venerable Sir, is there one thing through the abandoning of which ignorance, unknowing of true reality, is abandoned by a monk, and true wisdom arises? There is one thing, monk, through the abandoning of which ignorance, unknowing of true reality, is abandoned by a monk, and true wisdom arises. And what is that one thing, venerable sir? Ignorance, monk, is that one thing through the abandoning of which ignorance is abandoned by a monk, and true wisdom arises. But, venerable sir, how should a monk know? How should he see for ignorance to be abandoned by him and true wisdom to arise? Here, monk, a monk has heard, nothing is worth adhering to. When a monk has heard nothing is worth adhering to, he directly knows everything. Having directly known everything, he fully understands everything. Having fully understood everything, he sees all signs differently. He sees the eye differently. He sees forms differently. He sees eye consciousness differently. He sees eye contact differently. And whatever feeling arises with eye contact as condition, experiencing pleasure, pain, or as neither painful nor pleasant, that too he sees differently. And then the Buddha continues here for each of the sense bases: the ear, the nose, the tongue, the body, and then the mind, these 6 sense bases. He sees the mind differently. He sees mental objects differently. He sees mind consciousness differently. He sees mind contact differently. And whatever feeling arises with mind contact as condition, experiencing pleasure, pain, or as neither painful nor pleasant, that too he sees differently. When, monk, a monk knows and sees thus, ignorance, unknowing of true reality, is abandoned by him, and true wisdom arises. Okay, so if you starting to understand either the 3 poisons or 3 unwholesome roots of craving, anger, and ignorance, or you're starting to understand dependent origination, which is what we're going to be studying in the next book, volume 5, dependent origination explains to you that the number one problem that is causing all of this craving and anger and discontentedness is ignorance, the unknowing of true reality. And this is why you've been guided from the very beginning of learning with me to never believe anything that I share. Because belief, you don't know what's true or false. You can't get to wisdom based on belief, so you can't eradicate ignorance through belief. So you've always been taught to learn, to reflect and independently verify the teachings and practice. And that's what actually transforms the mind, helping you to arise wisdom. And as you arise wisdom, you're eliminating more and more ignorance in the mind. And in the unenlightened state, the mind is ignorant of craving and anger. It doesn't understand what it doesn't understand. The unenlightened mind doesn't understand why it gets angry or sad or frustrated. It'll blame other people for anything that's happening in our life. In the unenlightened state, we will tend to blame other people for all the things that we're experiencing. It's everyone else's fault that I'm experiencing what I'm experiencing. But when you understand the Four Noble Truths and you're deeply practicing to establish right view, you understand that the mind is causing its own discontentedness, and anything that you experience in life is a result of your own decisions. So the Buddha's student here is asking him, like, how do I bend in this ignorance? How do I get rid of this unknowing of true reality and arise true wisdom? Well, he talks about in other teachings about visiting a teacher and listening to a teacher and learning. He talks about a lot of different things in other places. But here he's just talking about one aspect of eliminating ignorance. There's many aspects to eliminating ignorance. But here he's talking about understanding the 6 sense bases. And this is what's going to help eliminate the ignorance. And this is just one facet of that. If you understand the 6 sense bases, and that the eyes, the ears, the nose, the tongue, the body, and the mind itself is experiencing contact, and as you experience this contact through these sense bases, the mind then, because of craving, desire, attachment, is either going to experience a conditioned pleasant feeling, painful feeling, or neither painful nor pleasant. The mind is longing and yearning through these sense bases, wanting, expecting, longing and yearning for agreeable contact. So when you see something with the eyes that's agreeable to you, you might get pleasant feelings. And then it's only a matter of time before you see something disagreeable where you get painful feelings. And this is happening with the ears, the nose, the tongue, the bodily contact in the mind. I gave you guys an example last class where if you're sitting at a red light and somebody pulls up alongside of you with music that you like, it's like, wow, that's my jam, that's my music. All right, let's go. Yeah, wonderful music. But then you pull up to the next traffic light and somebody else pulls up, and now this is music that you find horrible, and now you get frustrated or irritated. Maybe you start hating this person that they're playing this music. But that's because the mind doesn't realize that this is impermanent. This is just sounds that are coming through the ears, and it's only going to last for 3 to 5 minutes. Why get frustrated about it? It's going to be over. No longer having that craving, you can understand that, okay, there's some sounds that are coming into the mind through the ears, and whether it's agreeable or disagreeable, it doesn't matter. It's just sounds. But as long as you have craving in your mind of you want to hear this kind of music and you don't want to hear this kind of music, now you're going to get pleasant feelings when you hear this kind of music, and you're going to get painful feelings when you hear this kind of music. So by getting rid of your craving and just realizing all this contact through the sense bases, no matter what sense base, that it's just impermanent and it's going to be gone at some point. So there's no need to arise any kind of frustration or irritation or other discontent feelings. Let's see. So the Buddha says that a monk knows and sees thus, ignorance, unknowing of true reality is abandoned by him and true wisdom arises. So when you can see what I just described about the 6 sense bases, when you can see the reality in that, then you start to understand this fetter of central desire, about how the mind's longing and yearning through these sense bases, wanting agreeable contact. And you can see that anytime your mind has been discontent, you've been longing and yearning through these sense bases. Either conditioned pleasant feelings arise because you see something agreeable, you hear something agreeable, you smell something agreeable, you taste something agreeable. There's certain physical objects that come in contact with the body that are agreeable, or there's certain thoughts that you have in the mind that are agreeable, and you get these conditioned pleasant feelings. But then as craving is in the mind, because there's something that you see as agreeable, then there's also going to be something that you see as disagreeable. So now when you see something with the eyes that's disagreeable, you're going to get painful feelings. When you hear something that's disagreeable, you're going to get painful feelings. When you smell something, when you taste something, when something comes in contact with the body, Or you have certain thoughts that are mental objects that you're thinking about that are disagreeable. Now you're going to have painful feelings. So you can cut this off and let it go, no longer allowing the mind to do this. And getting ahead of those pleasant feelings is the way to do it. So as long as you allow the mind to indulge and welcome and invite in those pleasant feelings, it's only a matter of time before that condition changes and the mind's going to end up in painful feelings. We understand in the unenlightened state eliminating painful feelings. That one's like really easy to understand. But when it gets to eliminating the conditioned pleasant feelings, people are a little bit hesitant to understand this. But if you understand it's a conditioned feeling, it's temporary, so therefore it's ultimately displeasing, you can understand that you need to let go of this temporary pleasant feeling in order to get to this permanent joy or this permanent unconditioned happiness. That's the only way to get to it, is that you have to retrain the mind to no longer experience conditioned pleasant feelings. As long as you keep allowing it to do that, it's going to keep experiencing those conditioned pleasant feelings, and thus the conditioned painful feelings are right behind it, whether they're spaced out a few hours, a few days, a few weeks, even a few years. If you get a job and you really are so excited about that job, and you get so happy and so excited based on the condition of this job, if you lose that job 5 years from now, meaning the company goes out of business or they lay you off or some other reason, 5 years from now, you're going to experience sadness, anger, frustration, because you allowed the mind to get those conditioned pleasant feelings 5 years ago. So 5 years later, you're going to get the painful feelings right along with it when the condition changes. So that's why it takes a certain amount of time to get to enlightenment, because you have to go through all the different experiences that you're having and that you've already clung to, that you've already had conditioned feelings. And as you're starting to let go of these cravings, desires, attachments, you can feel a bit of sadness come into the mind as you're moving the mind to enlightenment. You can feel a bit of dullness and lethargic coming into the mind, a little bit of unmotivation sometimes as you're letting go of cravings, because the mind doesn't understand how to function in any other way than with craving in the unenlightened state. So as you're starting to peel these onion back, or you're starting to restrain the mind and pull it back, it hasn't learned how to enjoy something without craving, desire, attachment. The only thing that the unenlightened mind knows is those conditioned feelings and chasing after cravings. So when you're starting to restrain the mind and it's not getting what it wants, it starts experiencing some of these painful feelings. And part of the training of the mind is you need to train the mind how to enjoy life and enjoy all aspects of life without cravings, desires, attachments. Understanding how to get to that unconditioned peace and calm, serenity, and contentedness with joy. So that's part of the training. So you might feel at certain times a lack of motivation or a lack of enthusiasm or unwillingness to do something. And that's when you arise the enlightenment factor of energy to now arise this enthusiasm and learn how to enjoy the present moment without clinging to it, that you can enjoy something and then off to the next thing. Right? You can just kind of wash your hands of it and move on to the next thing. You don't need to cling to it and long for it to continue and continue and continue. Do you guys have any questions on this chapter? You can put those into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions that you like. All right, I'm not seeing any questions on any of our platforms, so we'll move on to the next one, which is chapter 23. I'm going to get a little sip of water here. All right, this one is titled Knowing and Seeing as Impermanent. Then a certain monk approached the perfectly enlightened one and said to him, Venerable Sir, is there one thing that through abandoning of which ignorance, a knowing of true reality is abandoned by a monk, and true wisdom arises? Monk, when a monk knows and sees the I as impermanent, ignorance, a knowing of true reality is abandoned by him, and true wisdom arises. When he knows and sees forms as impermanent, when he knows and sees as impermanent, whatever feeling arises with eye contact as condition, ignorance is abandoned by him, and true wisdom arises. This goes on for the ear, the nose, the tongue, the body, and then the mind. So here I'll read the last one. Monk, when a monk knows and sees the mind as impermanent, Ignorance, unknowing of true reality, is abandoned by him, and true wisdom arises. When he knows and sees mental objects as impermanent, when he knows and sees as impermanent whatever feeling arises with mind contact as condition, ignorance is abandoned by him, and true wisdom arises. When a monk knows and sees thus, ignorance, unknowing of true reality, is abandoned by him, and true wisdom arises. So this is very similar to the last discourse, but instead of talking about the six sense bases and eliminating ignorance with that, he's talking about eliminating ignorance by understanding the universal truth of impermanence. So sometimes when people read discourses of the Buddha, they think that one discourse, that's the only way to eliminate ignorance. But you see that the Buddha teaches in the same method, in the same style, that you need to look at the Buddha's teachings in their totality, that it's not just one discourse that is going to explain to you how to eliminate ignorance. There's multiple discourses that you can put together and see the totality of what he's describing to eliminate ignorance. In true reality, everything the Buddha teaches is going to eliminate ignorance in one way or another. But here he's just honing in on a couple teachings. Even learning the 5 precepts is eliminating ignorance. Learning the Eightfold Path, or the Four Noble Truths, or the Brahma Viharas, or learning how to meditate. This is all eliminating ignorance because you're learning the teachings. You're reflecting on them to independently verify them, and you're practicing them. But here he's honing in on the universal truth of impermanence, because you need to be able to see that very, very clearly, that all conditioned objects will arise, they change, and they fade away. And this helps you to justify why it would be very unwise for the mind to crave or cling any particular object. As long as you crave or cling and try to hold on to a particular object in order to get those pleasant feelings, if you understand that it's impermanent, then you understand you're setting your mind up for sabotage, because you're clinging to an impermanent object, wanting permanent feelings. But this doesn't occur. You're not able to accomplish permanent feelings through craving and clinging to impermanent objects. So that's why understanding the universal truth of impermanence is so important. Any questions on this particular discourse? So I don't see any questions here. So we'll move on to chapter 24. This one is titled Direct Knowledge for a Sick One. Monks, if 5 things do not slip away from a weak and sick monk, it can be predicted of him in no long time with the destruction of the taints he will realize for himself with direct knowledge, experience, in this very life, the taintless liberation of mind, liberation by wisdom, and having entered upon it, he will reside in it. What 5? Here, a monk resides, reflecting on the unattractiveness of the body, perceiving the dissatisfaction of food, perceiving non-excitement in the entire world, reflecting on impermanence in all conditioned objects, and he has the perception of death well established internally. If these 5 things do not slip away from a weak and sick monk, it can be predicted of him in no long time with the destruction of the taints he will realize for himself with direct knowledge or experience in this very life, the taintless liberation of mind, liberation by wisdom, and having entered upon it, he will reside in it. Okay, so this is 5 things that the Buddha is sharing that you should develop in your practice before you get sick. And as you're sick, you can maintain these in the mind, and then ultimately they will lead to the destruction of the fetters. And he's calling them taints here, or defilements, or pollutions of mind, because that's how you get to enlightenment, is by eliminating the 10 fetters. Each of those individual pollutions that he describes, there's an ultimate solution of how to eliminate each one of those 10 fetters. And that's where you ultimately get to enlightenment, by cleaning the mind out of all the pollution that the mind's holding on to. You've purified the mind. It's now unconditioned. But with those 10 fetters, you have a conditioned mind. So you need to uproot those, purify the mind, and now you get to this unconditioned mental state that you experience for yourself, and you'll know for many years that the mind hasn't experienced any discontent feelings whatsoever. So here, I'll just run through these and kind of share them with you. The first one, he's talking about the unattractiveness of the body. this relates to central desire. Central desire is a very challenging fetter to get rid of. It's very challenging to train the mind, because what we know for this life and many lives before this is chasing after our central pleasures. And there's the mind longing and yearning through the six sense bases, wanting pleasant feelings. One of the strongest central desires we have is typically for sexual contact, because all six senses are involved during the intimate contact. So the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, the body, and the mind itself are all involved, and these sense bases are being stimulated, and that's why there's these significant pleasant feelings. Oftentimes, if you're angry or you're feeling some other painful feeling, you might turn to sex in order to try to get to pleasant feelings. But this is just the craving, desire, attachment, and the untrained mind doesn't know how to get back to peacefulness, because it has these conditional experiences, and it thinks that if it can just get this conditional experience, then I'll get my pleasant feelings back. And it may be sex, it may be a piece of chocolate cake, it may be going shopping, it may be gambling, it may be drugs or alcohol, or any number of things that the untrained mind is going to turn to. But this intimate contact is one of the strongest central desires that we have. So the way that you help train the mind to not have this is through developing the unattractiveness of the body. Because we see the human body as being attractive in the unenlightened state, because we see the hair made up in a certain way. We might see makeup or jewelry or a certain face, or we might see muscles or certain shape of body or certain clothing or jewelry, things like this. We do all these different things to the body. We even add perfumes and colognes and scents. We're trying to beautify the body so that somebody else will be attracted to it, and then we might experience some intimate contact at some point. But if you understand true reality of the body and you start viewing it as being unattractive, there are certain meditation techniques that you can employ that will significantly reduce your central desire and thus your sexual contact and your interest to have sexual contact. So you might use this in order to limit your sexual contact. If you have a lot of partners, it might bring it down to just one. Or if you're trying to eliminate sexual desire and sexual contact altogether, you can use this meditation. And it's in Volume 1, Chapter 11. Not everybody's going to be interested in doing this right off the bat. Of course, as you learn and practice these teachings, everybody's at different stages of their life and their development. You know, if you're fairly young and you're in a relationship and you're enjoying sexual contact, okay, then that's what you're doing and that's what you're choosing to do. But at some point, you are probably going to decide to let go of sexual contact. You're not going to be 80 or 90 or 100 years old still having sexual contact. But you may decide to let it go even sooner than that, as you start to observe how by doing that, it actually leads to painful feelings. Because you can get sex for certain periods of time, but there are certain times when you can't get it. And then the mind's going to be discontent. It's going to be irritated and frustrated and annoyed. So you can develop the unattractiveness of the body and see the body as it truly is, and that will help you to reduce and ultimately eliminate your sexual cravings. Then there's perceiving the dissatisfaction in food. Again, one of the other central desires that are in the mind is this longing and yearning for certain foods. And sometimes we might emotionally eat. If you're feeling painful feelings, you might turn to certain foods as a way to get pleasant feelings. And this is just allowing the problem to continue. If you allow this to continue, the mind is still craving and it's trying to get to those conditioned pleasant feelings. And as long as you allow this cycle to continue, it's going to end up back in the painful feelings at some point. So what you train the mind to do is that when you see the mind longing and yearning for food based on a condition and it just wants pleasant feelings, you restrain the mind and you pull it back. You train the mind to not just long and yearn for certain pleasurable foods and that you're trying to please the mind through the tongue, but instead you eat food to sustain the health of the body. Where right now, if you have craving, desire, attachment in the mind, there's probably certain foods that you know you really like, and those are your most enjoyable foods. And then there's other foods that maybe you wouldn't even get near them. You can't even stand the smell. And if you tasted them, you might even think you would vomit or something like this, because there's craving, desire, attachment in the mind. So it's not seeing all foods as equally. It has agreeable food and it has disagreeable food, or it has agreeable flavors and disagreeable flavors. So you would like to get to the point where you see that all food is just sustaining the body, that you can get to a point where you can enjoy your chocolate cake and know that it tastes good, but you're not clinging to it. So even though here the Buddha is saying perceiving the dissatisfaction in food, it's not that you're, thinking that food is horrible. It's just understanding that food isn't going to lead to a permanent joyful mind. Even though the mind might emotionally eat and it might long and yearn and go towards food for those pleasant feelings, understand that ultimately you're going to end up in dissatisfaction if you allow the mind to continue to long and yearn for foods when you're feeling those painful feelings. The way to get rid of the painful feelings is to eliminate the cravings, desires, attachments. And that's how you get rid of the painful feelings. Going to something like food isn't going to eliminate your painful feelings. You'll get pleasant feelings temporarily, but your mind's going to be right back in the painful feelings at some point. Perceiving non-excitement in the entire world. By you understanding this, then you can reside more peaceful. That if you get really excited, for example, when things are fairly peaceful in the world and you get really excited about what's going on in the world, or maybe there's a new leader that is elected in a certain country and you're like, oh, this is great for the world. Yes, this new leader is coming into power and they're going to be the president or prime minister. And you get so excited with that. Well, that's a conditioned feeling, and it's only a matter of time before the mind is now going to be in the painful feelings. So understand that there's nothing in the world that you should excite over. So if some new leader comes to power, it's like, oh, excellent. This country has a new leader, and that looks like it's going to be really great for the world. Wonderful. But you don't need to get excited about it, because if you can maintain this middle way where it's like, oh, wonderful, there's this new leader that's coming to power, this looks really good for that country and perhaps even the world. Okay, well, that's your opinion and that's how you feel, and you're sitting with that feeling. But now when that leader is no longer in power, you already know that that leader is impermanent. They're not going to be there permanently. So then when they're no longer in power, your mind can maintain its contentedness no matter who's the leader. So there's various things in the world that you might get this excitement over when you see certain things happening in the world, but you need to get to the point where you're not excited about what's going on in the world, because when things don't go the way you want in the world, you're going to end up in painful feelings and very frustrated. So just maintain your contentedness. Somebody goes to court and they're found not guilty, rather than getting excited, just be like, all right, they're found not guilty. I had a feeling they were not guilty. Or someone goes to court and they're found guilty. It's a big public court case. You're like, all right, they're found guilty. Of course, I kind of figured they were guilty. And you just maintain your contentedness rather than getting so excited. Or you see that a war has started, rather than feeling angry or disgruntled about that, then just understand that, okay, this is outside of my control. Other people are making these decisions. Or you see that a war has ended, right? Well, of course the war ended, because it's impermanent. We always knew it was going to end, right? And just like the peacefulness, we know that the peacefulness in the world is going to end at some point too. There's going to be a war, right? So when you see these things that are happening, they're all just impermanent. If you allow the mind to get really excited when a war ends, for example, then when another war starts, you're going to get angry and frustrated. So perceiving non-excitement in the entire world, not taking conditioned pleasant feelings based on what's happening in the world. Having this reflection on impermanence in all conditioned objects, we just talked about that in the last discourse. And then the perception of death well established internally. Remember, the Buddha is giving guidance to someone who's sick. When they're sick, they may end up dying, particularly during the lifetime of the Buddha, because their medical care wasn't as significant and developed as it is today. So people could very easily die when they're sick. So when somebody's sick, they might get really worried about dying. So what you would like to do is you would like to maintain the perception of death, and you would like to get that way before you ever get sick, or way before you ever get close to death. And I've described this in other classes about reflecting on your own death, because death is going to be experienced by all of us. We have been experiencing death many times in the past. So death is going to either sneak up on you and catch you by surprise, and then you're going to be really fearful and grabbing onto everything and be afraid to die. Or you can confront death on your own terms, which is how you develop the perception of death, is that you sit somewhere, you might close your eyes, and you envision that you've died, and you're like a fly on the wall, and you're kind of watching over your funeral and everything that's happening since your death. And this is how you develop and reflect on death and confront death on your terms, because you're going to face death at some point anyway. You might as well face it on your terms when you feel like you would like to face it. And then as you're facing it and you're reflecting on your own death, you might get sad, you might grieve, you might even cry as part of this. And that's because the craving, desire, attachment, you're starting to let it go. So now, because you're not getting what you want, which is permanent life, the mind might grieve or have sadness. And this is part of the process of eliminating the craving and desire to exist in the world. And then ultimately, over 2, 3, 4, however many sessions, you can let go of your craving to exist in the world. But then you're also not craving non-existence either. You can practice this middle way where you understand that there is this life. There is a body, there is a mind. They've come together for this life. You need to care for them and take care of them. But you understand this existence is impermanent, and it's only a matter of time before death comes to visit you. So by you confronting death on your terms through reflecting on death, you can get comfortable with your own death, so that then when it comes, however many years from now, you have already confronted it and you'll already have experienced it in these reflections of death, and it won't be such a surprise to you. It won't sneak up on you, and you won't have fear of death. So these are 5 things that the Buddha is sharing that you can maintain your knowledge of when you're sick or even any other time during your life, because this is going to help you get to more liberation by maintaining all of these things in the mind. Let me see if you guys have any questions on these. Let's see, I'm not seeing any questions anywhere. So we'll just go ahead and move off to the next one, which is actually very similar to that one that we just studied. So this is developing and cultivating 5 things. First discourse, chapter 25. Monks, if any male or female ordained practitioner develops and cultivates 5 things, one of 2 fruits is to be predicted: either final knowledge or wisdom in this very life, or, if there is a residual remaining, the non-returner stage of enlightenment. What 5? Here, a monk has mindfulness well established internally for gaining the wisdom that discerns the arising and passing away of mental objects. He resides reflecting on the unattractiveness of the body, perceiving the dissatisfaction of food, perceiving non-excitement in the entire world, and reflecting on impermanence in all conditioned objects. If any male or female ordained practitioner develops and cultivates these 5 things, one of 2 fruits is to be predicted: either final knowledge or wisdom in this very life, or, if there is a residual remaining, the non-returner stage of enlightenment. Okay, so here, I'll just point something out to you guys. If you guys haven't noticed this already through reading a lot of the teachings of the Buddha invokes a method of teaching that we actually do today. And experts say that this is an absolute wonderful way to teach. And the Buddha discovered this on his own 2,500 years ago, is that he's going to tell you what he's about to tell you. I'm going to tell you what I'm about to tell you. Then he's going to tell you it. He's going to teach it to you. Then he's going to tell you what he told you. This is an excellent way to present content to an audience, is you tell them what you're going to tell them, you tell them, and then you tell them what you told them. And the Buddha discovered this method 2,500 years ago, and even today, people say that this is an excellent way to present content to people. So if you're teaching, or if you're maybe introducing a client or a customer to something new, that this is a really great method of teaching somebody and helping them to understand with clarity what it is you're about to share with them. So the only thing that's really different about this discourse than the last one is the Buddha is talking right here about mindfulness well established internally for gaining the wisdom that discerns the arising and passing away of mental objects. Here, this goes back to right mindfulness, the bodily sensations, the feelings, the condition of the mind and mental objects, and having awareness of what these are. The main mental objects that you would like to be aware of are the 10 fetters. These are the pollutions in the mind. These are deeply rooted mental objects in the mind that you would like to be aware of when they're arising and when they're passing away. Because as they're arising in the mind, you need to cut them off and let them go. So something like sensual desire, when you see the mind longing and yearning through the sense bases, you would like to cut that off and let it go, restrain the mind. Or you see ill will arising, you would like to know that that's arising and then cut that off and let it go and restrain the mind. Or if you see conceit, which is that arrogance and pride, the judging other people, the measuring and comparing each other, putting yourself above people or below people. When you see that arising, you would like to cut it off and let it go. So each of these 10 fetters are mental objects, and you would like to have awareness of these, because the more you understand what the fetters are, when you see them arise in the mind, you'll notice them right away, and you'll be able to cut them off and let them go. And this will really help you to actually eliminate them from the mind. So the Buddha is saying a practitioner who develops these 5 things, which are 4 things that we've already discussed in this new one, he's saying that either final knowledge will be predicted in this very life, which is actually enlightenment. When you get to final knowledge, you've learned all the path to enlightenment. You've acquired the wisdom of the entire path to enlightenment, and now you've attained final knowledge, that you don't have any ignorance in the mind whatsoever. You've eradicated all the ignorance, and now the mind has wisdom about the entire path to enlightenment. And now, having attained final knowledge, you won't have any more discontentedness at all. You'll be able to speak about these teachings with ease if somebody should happen to ask you. You're not necessarily going to be a teacher, but you understand the teaching so well because you've learned, you've reflected to independently verify, and you've practiced to uproot all the pollutions out of the mind, that you've attained final knowledge or final wisdom. It's also called right wisdom as part of the tenfold path. It's the eightfold path that gets you to enlightenment. But as you're getting to enlightenment, you then are practicing right wisdom and right liberation, which is called the tenfold path. This final knowledge or right wisdom, or sometimes it's called true wisdom, this is what leads to your liberation of mind, because ignorance is that number one problem that is hindering you from experiencing enlightenment. So that's why you need to get to wisdom, and that's going to be enlightenment when you get to final knowledge. And then these 5 things that he's talking about here, if it doesn't lead to enlightenment, the Buddha is saying if there's a residual remaining, what he's talking about is a residual amount of craving. So you might have done all the work on the path to enlightenment, but you still got a residual amount of craving. You're still feeling a little bit of ickiness. In that 3rd stage of enlightenment as a non-returner, you're still going to experience discontentedness. It's going to be very infrequent, and it's going to be not very intense. It might be once every 3 months or once every 6 months that you're experiencing this discontentedness. But don't be complacent. Continue to be dedicated and diligent that got you to that point. Because it's fairly insignificant and it doesn't happen very frequently, it's very easy for the mind to become complacent during this 3rd stage of enlightenment, because there's only a residual amount of craving that still remains in the mind. So wring out your rag, get every single drop of craving, desire, attachment out of the mind. And that's how you ultimately get liberated, and you won't even experience that little bit of ickiness every 3 months or every 6 months. That'll even be eradicated from the mind, where you'll just have complete peace and joy all the time. Let me see what questions you guys have on this chapter. As you guys know, you can put it into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom. Looks like Koshi has a question here. Whenever we are doing an analytical meditation, like reflecting on death, how to come out of meditation and transition normally in the surrounding life? Because many a times thoughts from the meditation will pop up later in the day and make it hard to let go of, because it was hard to let go of them in the first place while meditating. Okay, so if you're reflecting on death, I don't consider this a meditation, but I know what you're talking about there, Koshi. So if you're noticing that later in the day, those thoughts are coming back up, that shows you that you still have craving, shows that the mind is still clinging. So use that to let you know that you're going to need to do this reflection on death another time in the future. So when the thoughts are coming back up in the, an hour or a few days later or what have you, cut that off and let it go. Redirect the mind. That's part of what you're doing to eliminate the craving. You kind of have to touch the craving and trigger it in order for it to arise in the mind and allow you to cut it off and let it go so that you can eliminate it from the mind. The way that I think about it is if you have a carpet and you've been sweeping the dust under the carpet for all these years, when you pull back that carpet, the dust is going to start flying all over the place. You're going to start choking and gagging. It's going to get into your eyes. And you got to clear all this dust out. And you're trying to clear as much of the dust out as you can, and then you put the carpet back down. But the thing is you can't get all the dust out by just pulling the carpet back one time. You've got to pull the carpet back and get the dust out multiple times. You got to hit the carpet. You got to wring out the carpet. You got to get this dust out by really destroying it, as the Buddha talks about, and eliminating it from the mind. So as you're doing those reflections on death, you are going to have some thoughts that come up later in your day or later in your week. And this is just showing you that there's still some clinging, and cut those thoughts off when they're occurring. And then when you notice that there's been a period of time, maybe 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, and you haven't had any thoughts about death, put the mind right back in that situation again. Do the reflection on death again, and now you'll most likely see that the feelings during the reflection on death will be less significant, and you'll have less arising later on in your day and in your week. So get to the point where you can do a reflection on death and you're not affected by it at all. It just seems like, yeah, of course, I'm going to die. It's normal. And then for the days and weeks afterwards, you don't even think about it. It's no big deal. It's like, yeah, of course I'm going to die. You're not aspiring to die. You're not wanting to die, but you're completely comfortable with it, and it doesn't worry your mind. You're not obsessed by it anymore. So that's what you would like to do. And coming out of meditation, you just come out, whether it's meditation, usually I chant on the way out, but if it's one of these reflections on death, you can just come out, just slowly open your eyes, slowly sit there, slowly look around, and just realize that, yeah, all this stuff is impermanent, everything around you. You don't need to do anything special to come out of the reflection of death. Just ease the mind out. You're not interested in just popping out, but just ease the mind out. And one of the things that I would do when I was reflecting on death, either my own death or the death of family members, in order to eliminate attachment, is I had certain things in my mind that I hadn't said to my grandmother or my mom, or that I wanted to hear from them, that I hadn't asked them those questions. So I would write those questions down, the things that I was interested in asking them, or the things that I was interested in telling them, so that then after I calm the mind down, after a few hours or a few days, I could pick up the phone and be like, hey, Grandma, I've always been meaning to tell you this. I've never told you. By the way, or hey, Mom, I've been meaning to ask you this. I've never asked you this question. They didn't know what I was doing on my own free time. I was just calling them up, asking them some questions or telling them some things. So you might decide to write these things down if you have certain thoughts that come to your mind. And this can also help you see potential cravings, desires, attachments as well. All right, I'm not seeing any other questions anywhere. So let's go to the next one, which is chapter 26. This is the second discourse, developing and cultivating 5 things. Monks, these 5 things, when developed and cultivated, lead exclusively to liberation, to freedom from strong feelings, to elimination, to peace, to direct knowledge or experience, to enlightenment, to nibbana. What 5? Here, a monk resides, reflecting on the unattractiveness of the body, perceiving the dissatisfaction of food, perceiving non-excitement in the entire world, reflecting on impermanence in all conditioned objects, and he has the perception of death well established internally. These 5 things, when developed and cultivated, lead exclusively to liberation, to freedom from strong feelings, to elimination, to peace, to direct knowledge or experience, to enlightenment, to nibbana. So this is the same one that we read a couple back, except instead of him talking about it in one way, here he's being very clear of these 5 things lead to enlightenment. So we've already described all of these 5 things. All right, so now we're in chapter 27, developing and cultivating 5 things, third discourse. Monks, these 5 things, when developed and cultivated, lead to the destruction of the taints. What 5? Here, a monk resides, reflecting on the unattractiveness of the body, perceiving the dissatisfaction of food, perceiving non-excitement in the entire world, reflecting on impermanence in all conditioned objects, and he has the perception of death well established internally. These 5 things, when developed and cultivated, lead to the destruction of the taints. So you guys are probably figuring this out by now. He's saying the same thing, he's just saying it different ways. The previous one, he's saying, hey, it leads to enlightenment. Well, here he's saying, hey, it leads to the destruction of the taints. Destruction of the taints is those 10 fetters. So eliminating the 10 fetters is what leads to enlightenment. So his students are capturing this at different times, right? He might have said one of these, at one point, and then maybe many months or years later, he said it in another way at a different point. So they're writing it down in all these different ways. And he's saying the same thing, he's just sharing it in a little bit of a different way. What I'd like to do is share with you guys here the 10 fetters, because some of you guys have been learning and practicing with me for a number of months or years at this point. And this particular chapter, not only is the Buddha talking about the destruction of the 10 fetters, but in the part where I'm sharing my reflections, I have the 10 fetters here for you to help you remember those and to learn them. So I'd like to give you guys a chance to ask any questions on any of these 10 fetters that you might be trying to understand, or that you're maybe having difficulties to understand how to eliminate, or you're actually trying to eliminate it and you're having challenges with it. Whether it's personal existence view, doubt, wrong behavior and observances, central desire, ill will, or any of the higher fetters, desire for form, desire for the formless, conceit, restlessness, or ignorance. These are all the 10 fetters, and I describe them in detail even back in chapter 3 of volume 1, but then I put them in all the other volumes at different places where they're needed in relationship to what the Buddha is sharing. So if you guys have any questions on the chapter that I just shared, or any of these 10 fetters, feel free to ask those questions, and I will help you to understand what any of these 10 fetters are and how to eliminate them. You're welcome, Koshi. Pleased to help you. Okay, so I'm not seeing any questions on anything that the Buddha shared or these 10 fetters. At any point you guys have any questions on these, you're welcome to let me know. By the way, there's a retreat coming up in August here in Chiang Mai at the temple where I teach. We're having a 6-day retreat where we're going to be focused on helping you get to the first stage of enlightenment. So in addition to other things that you need in order to get to the first stage of enlightenment, I'm going to be teaching these first 3 fetters in detail and how to eliminate them. I'm going to be spending about an hour and a half, 2 hours on each one of these fetters, explaining what they are, how to eliminate them, and how to know when you have eliminated them that they're no longer going to be in the mind. Okay? You guys are welcome and invited to attend that. So, chapter 28. This is titled Developing and Cultivating 5 Things, 4th Discourse. Monks, these 5 things, when developed and cultivated, have liberation of mind as their fruit, liberation of mind as their fruit and benefit. They have liberation by wisdom as their fruit, liberation by wisdom as their fruit and benefit. What 5? Here, a monk resides reflecting on the unattractiveness of the body, perceiving the dissatisfaction of food, perceiving non-excitement in the entire world, reflecting on impermanence in all conditioned objects, and he has the perception of death well established internally. These 5 things, when developed and cultivated, have liberation of mind as their fruit, liberation of mind as their fruit and benefit. They have liberation by wisdom as their fruit, liberation by wisdom as their fruit and benefit. When a monk is liberated in mind and liberated by wisdom, he is called a monk who has removed the crossbar, filled in the moat, pulled out the pillar, a boltless one, a noble one with banner lowered, with burden dropped, unaffected. And how has a monk removed the crossbar? Here, a monk has abandoned ignorance, unknowing of true reality, cut it off at the root, made it like a palm stump, obliterated it, so that it is no more subject to future arising. It is in this way that a monk has removed the crossbar. And how has a monk filled in the moat? Here, a monk has abandoned the wandering on in birth that brings renewed existence. He has cut it off at the root, made it like a palm stump, obliterated it, so that it is no more subject to future arising. It is in this way that a monk has filled in the moat. And how has a monk pulled out the pillar? Here, a monk has abandoned craving, cut it off at the root, made it like a palm stump, obliterated it so that it is no more subject to future arising. It is in this way that a monk has pulled out the pillar. And how is a monk a boltless one? Here, a monk has abandoned the 5 lower fetters, cut them off at the root, made them like a palm stump, obliterated them so that they are no more subject to future arising. It is in this way that a monk is a boltless one. And how is a monk a noble one, with banner lowered, with burden dropped, unaffected? Here, a monk has abandoned the conceit, I am, cut it off at the root, made it like a palm stump, obliterated it, so that it is no more subject to future arising. It is in this way that a monk is a noble one, with banner lowered, with burden dropped, unaffected. Okay, so here, even though the Buddha is describing things in a slightly different way, we've already studied a lot of these teachings, especially this first one. We've been covering that throughout the class today, where he's talking about the 5 different things that the mind needs to cultivate. So we've already talked about that. Now he's using these analogies to help you understand other aspects of your mind that you need to eliminate. And here, this first one is eliminating ignorance, which we've talked about in this program at different times, even in this class. And we've talked about it in other classes like the group learning program, about what ignorance is and how to eliminate it. You would like to start with those foundational teachings, the 3 universal truths, the 4 noble truths, the Eightfold Path, the 5 precepts, the Brahma Viharas, the 7 factors of enlightenment, the 10 fetters, and developing your meditation practice. That's where you would like to start as a foundational aspect of your teachings, and then get into all the other teachings. And that's where you're eliminating ignorance by not believing, but learning, reflecting, and practicing. Then here, he's talking about abandoning the wandering on in birth that brings renewed existence. This is where you're no longer interested in future existence. You get to the point where it's like, yeah, I'm not really interested in that. And you understand that existing in the world is just going to bring about grief, misery, and despair. That you're not interested in continuing to be reborn in this cycle of rebirth over and over and over and over and over again. But you're also not interested in non-existence either. What non-existence would be is like interested in committing suicide, right? That you're in the middle, where you're not interested in craving non-existence, but you're not craving existence either, where it's like, okay, here I am. There's this body, there's this mind. We're in this present moment. The mind's peaceful and joyful, and I'm just going to experience the moment. That you're not craving to exist and hold on to this world, but you're not craving to not exist either. The mind's firmly rooted in the present moment. Then, of course, craving. You guys have learned an extensive amount of craving at this point. The Buddha is just talking about it as removing the pillar, because that's what's holding up all this discontentedness. So by removing the pillar, it's helping to dismantle the discontentedness. And even use this language in a previous chapter that we studied in this book about dismantling discontentedness. So by getting rid of craving, you're removing this pillar, which then allows you to dismantle discontentedness. Then he talks about the boltless one, to eliminate the 5 lower fetters. That's the personal existence view, doubt, wrong behavior and observances, sensual desire, and ill will. Those are the 5 lower fetters. And those are fetters that you would be focusing on with even your 4 noble truths, your Eightfold Path, your 5 precepts. These are all leading to the elimination of the 10 fetters. No matter what the Buddha is teaching you, he doesn't explicitly call it out, but even something like the first precept, where he's teaching you to live compassionately for the welfare of all living beings, this is helping you to eliminate the 5th fetter of ill will. And where he's teaching you not to steal and to take things, this is helping you eliminate sensual desire. When he's teaching you not to have sexual misconduct, that's helping you to eliminate sensual desire. So every single one of the teachings of the Buddha are leading to the elimination of the 10 fetters in one way or another. And as you are practicing the foundational teachings and you're getting into understanding the 10 fetters, you can see this correlation more and more clearly. But as you're experiencing the jhanas, which are those 4 preliminary phases the mind experiences before it gets to the first stage of enlightenment, you would like to then start more directly focusing on the fetters themselves. Up until then, you're just getting your arms around all the foundational teachings. But once you've got that firmly under your belt and you're starting to experience the jhanas, because you wouldn't be experiencing the jhanas if you didn't understand all those foundational teachings. Those foundational teachings is what leads to the jhanas. And the Buddha describes those qualities of mind. So as you start seeing those qualities of mind with the jhanas starting to arise, now you start directing your attention to the 10 fetters, and now you start more skillfully working with each of those. And even though you might be focusing on some of the lower fetters, that doesn't mean you can't be focused on aspects of the higher fetters too. Even now, if you're not experiencing the jhanas, you don't need to wait until you get there to start working on eliminating them. So the fetter like the 8th fetter, this is a higher fetter, conceit, where there's arrogance, there's pride, there's measuring and comparing, there's judging people, putting yourself above or below people. Even now, wherever you see your mind doing that, cut it off and let it go. Redirect the mind. Don't allow the mind to keep doing that, because as long as you keep allowing the mind to do that, it will keep doing it. So just know that you're going to need to cut that off and let it go many times before it's fully uprooted out of the mind. So even if you're talking and you're like mid-sentence and you realize that what you're saying is quite arrogant and egotistical, cut it off. Just cut off the sentence. And even the person you're talking to is like, what are you saying? Oh, never mind. I don't need to say that. Hey, by the way, what did you think about, that TV show last night? Or, hey, it's quite warm out here. Don't you think maybe we should go find some AC somewhere? Or just redirect the mind to some other part of the conversation that you guys were talking about. There's no need to continue that. So whether you're halfway through your sentence, 3/4 of the way through your sentence, whether the thought is on the tip of your tongue and you see the arrogance and pride coming out, even though you're not in the jhanas yet, you can still cut that off and let it go. And that's going to help retrain your mind. And then next time, you'll shave it back further and further and further. So if you cut it off when you were 3/4 of the way through your sentence, maybe next time you cut it off when you're halfway through. And maybe next time you cut it off when it's on the tip of your tongue. And the next time you cut it off when you're just having the thought. And then the next time it doesn't even arise, perhaps, right? But you're going to have to cut it off many times before it shaves back to the point where there's no arrogance or ego that's arising. But you're going to need to shave it back like this and be comfortable to do that. And don't worry about if you're mid-sentence and you're cutting off your sentence. Don't worry. This is going to help you to train your mind. And then this last one, and that's actually why I started talking about the ego and conceit, is because of this last one. The Buddha's got this analogy of banner lowered, burden dropped, and unaffected. If you're raising up the banner, right, it's like, look at me, I've got this and I've got that. I bought a new car. I got this certificate. I got that certificate. I've got this training and I've got that training. This is like raising up your banner so everybody can see the flag that you're flying and the banner that you're flying. And look at all my accomplishments. Look at everything that I've got. Now, if you're in social media, you're going to see plenty of people that are doing that, right? But just because other people are doing it doesn't mean that you need to do that. So reside humble and eliminate this conceit of, I am so great. Look at me. I am great. I am this. I am that. I am that. I am this. I am that. So that's lowering the banner, okay? So let me see what questions you guys have on this, if any at all. You guys know how to ask those questions through Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom. Or in Zoom, you can raise your hand and ask any questions that you like. So Jacqueline's asking in Facebook, boltless, what is meant by a boltless one? Okay, so I taught this down here. This is where you can see it. Oops, it's not here. I've put this in other places because I don't recall it off the top of my head, Jacqueline, but I've got it in here somewhere. Let me see if I can find it. I'm going to use my search here. See if I can find it. I don't see it in this edition. You know what I'll do, Jacqueline, is I will look this up because I know that I have this. I've described it somewhere. And I think just off the top of my head, what it means by a boltless one is those 5 lower fetters are keeping you bolted, right? Bolted down. And now when you're boltless one, you don't have anything holding you down. You can eliminate these higher fetters and then get to enlightenment. There's nothing holding you back at that point. But I'm going to look it up and see, and I'll send it to you by private message in Facebook. Okay, let's see if we have any other questions. I don't see any other questions. So let's move on to the next chapter, which is chapter 29. This one is titled, One Who is Constantly Dedicated. But monks, if a central thought, a thought of ill will, or a thought of harming arises in a monk while walking, he does not tolerate it, but abandons it, dispels it, terminates it, and obliterates it. Then that monk is said to be dedicated and to have moral concern of wrongdoing. He is constantly and continuously energetic and determined while walking. If a central thought, a thought of ill will, or a thought of harming arises in a monk while standing, and he does not tolerate it, but abandons it, dispels it, terminates it, and obliterates it, then that monk is said to be dedicated and to have moral concern of wrongdoing. He is constantly, continuously energetic and determined while standing. If a central thought, a thought of ill will, or a thought of harming arises in a monk while sitting, and he does not tolerate it, but abandons it, dispels it, terminates it, and obliterates it, then that monk is said to be dedicated and to have moral concern of wrongdoing. He is constantly and continuously energetic and determined while sitting. If a central thought, a thought of ill will, or a thought of harming arises in a monk while wakefully lying down, and he does not tolerate it, but abandons it, dispels it, terminates it, and obliterates it, then that monk is said to be dedicated and to have moral concern of wrongdoing. He is constantly, continuously energetic and determined while wakefully lying down. All right, so here the Buddha is talking about mindfulness here, having awareness of the mind, and he's talking about right intention. If you notice here, he's saying a central thought, a thought of ill will, or a thought of harming. If you remember right intention, it has 3 aspects to it. The intention of renunciation, the intention of non-ill will, and the intention of harmlessness. This is what you need to cultivate in order to get to enlightenment, is the right thinking or the right thought or the right intention of renunciation, which is to let go of these central thoughts and any kind of unwholesomeness in the mind. You need to cultivate the intention of non-ill will or loving kindness, and that's also goodwill, or the intention of harmlessness, where you're not interested in harming others. Because as long as you're interested in harming others and you're putting out harm through your intention, speech, and actions, that harm is going to come back to you. So here the Buddha is saying that while you're walking, while you're standing, while you're sitting, or while you're wakefully lying down, this is like when you're coming out of sleep and you're kind of starting to wake up, and also while you're falling off to sleep, because your thoughts can invade you while you're waking up in the morning or while you're falling asleep. Your thoughts can invade you. So you need to even have mindfulness during this time, that you can be aware of the mind, so that if a central thought arises, a thought of ill will, or a thought of harming arises, you cut it off. No matter what you're doing, you're walking down the street, you're sitting at a red light, you're at work, you're in a business meeting, no matter where you're at, what you're doing, if you have mindfulness and you're fully aware of the mind, when a central thought, a thought of ill will, or a thought of harming comes up, if you know you're working to cultivate right intention, then you cut those off. And the Buddha says, if you're doing this, then you're dedicated, right? You're not complacent, you're dedicated. And you have moral concern of wrongdoing, meaning you're concerned about doing wrong things and you're not interested in doing unwholesome things, that you're interested in cultivating wholesomeness, and that you maintain this energy, that you're not complacent, that you're not dull and lethargic, that you maintain your enthusiasm as you're going about your day-to-day work, and you're maintaining your mindfulness at all times, your awareness of mind. And if you see any of these thoughts, either central thoughts, meaning craving, desire, attachment, longing through the sense bases, or thoughts of ill will, which are like anger, hatred, ill will, frustration, irritation, wishing harm on people, or a thought of harming, where you're interested in harming people, or you want to harm people, you're trying to get back at people and have revenge towards people. Where you see any of those things arising, cut them off and let them go, obliterate it, redirect the mind. Over time, as you shave this back more and more, those thoughts won't arise. But you need to get in the habit of being diligent and determined to oversee the mind and be aware of the mind, so that when those thoughts are arising, you can cut them off and let them go. And by staying dedicated, determined, and diligent with this, eventually you'll get to the point where those thoughts won't arise. But you're going to need to go through enough of this that you experience it, that you cut it back and cut it back and cut it back. It's kind of like a wild bush. If a wild bush is growing, you need to cut it back and cut it back and cut it back and cut it back, all the way to the point where you get to the roots and you uproot it out of the mind. That's what this consistent ongoing training is doing, is helping you to uproot the mental objects. Here, we're talking about the mental object of sensual desire and ill will. That's what's motivating the central thoughts, and the thought of ill will and the thought of harming. So by you staying diligent and determined to oversee the mind and be aware of the mind with mindfulness, where you see the fetter or the taint or the pollution of sensual desire arising, or you see the fetter, the taint, or the pollution of ill will arising, you can take direct action to cut it off and let it go. And that's what's going to cut this bush back and then ultimately uproot this mental object out of the mind. And of course, you've got breathing mindfulness meditation and generosity there to help you with sensual desire. And you've got loving kindness meditation and practicing loving kindness through your intention, speech, and actions to help you get rid of this ill will that's in the mind. And then you just stay dedicated and diligent to oversee your mind with mindfulness throughout your day, so that anytime you see a central thought arise or a thought of ill will arise, you cut it off and let it go, redirect the mind. Don't allow the mind to dwell there. This is rewiring the mind. So rather than going down that path of central thoughts or ill will or harming, you're choosing to go down this other path of the intention of renunciation, the intention of non-ill will or loving kindness, in the intention of harmlessness. And now more and more, the mind will just always go down this path, because this old path will get overgrown. So let me see what questions you guys have on this one, if anything at all. Okay, I'm not seeing anything in Facebook or YouTube, and I don't see anything in Zoom either. So now we're on chapter 30. This one is titled, One Who is Constantly Complacent. It's exactly the opposite of the chapter we just read. That if a central thought, a thought of ill will, or a thought of harming arises in a monk while walking, he tolerates it. He does not abandon it, dispel it, terminate it, and obliterate it. Then that monk is said to be lacking of effort and moral concern of wrongdoing. He is constantly and continuously complacent and lacking in energy while walking, while standing, while sitting, while lying down. So you're not interested in complacency. That's actually one of the 5 hindrances to enlightenment, that if you allow the mind to be complacent, you're not diligent, dedicated, and determined, then you're not going to be able to move the mind to enlightenment. And you might go through periods of complacency at different times in your practice. This is normal. But when you see the complacency come into the mind, then you'd like to arise this enlightenment factor of energy, where you now have enthusiasm and motivation to apply to the practice. And that's where you arise the enlightenment factor of investigation, which leads to the enlightenment factor of energy, which leads to the enlightenment factor of joy. So wherever you see complacency coming into the mind, the sooner you catch it and the sooner you eradicate it, the better. If you allow it to continue to exist, the longer that it exists, the harder it is to get out of it. So the moment you see it, like if it's been an hour or two, or if it's been a day or 2 or 3, and you're noticing you're not meditating, you're not interested in attending classes or reading the books or getting help, don't allow that complacency to set in, because it's much harder to get rid of. It's like cobwebs in the mind, and it'll create dullness and lethargic condition in the mind. So take action on it right away. Stay determined and dedicated. You're not interested in complacency. Okay, so let's move on to the next one, which is chapter 31. This is the last one for today, and it's a fairly long discourse, so I might end up pausing as we go to help you guys understand it. I think that'll be a lot better. So I'll just read this one piece by piece, and then I will help you to understand it as we go. So here it's titled 4 Modes of Practice for Destruction of the Taints. Monks, there are these 4 modes of practice. What for? 1. Practice that is painful with sluggish direct knowledge, experience. 2. Practice that is painful with quick direct knowledge or experience. 3. Practice that is pleasant with sluggish direct knowledge or experience. And 4. Practice that is pleasant with quick direct knowledge or experience. So painful mode with sluggish direct knowledge or experience. Here, a monk resides reflecting on the unattractiveness of the body, perceiving the dissatisfaction of food, perceiving non-excitement in the entire world, reflecting on impermanence in all conditioned objects, and he has the perception of death well established internally. He resides depending upon these 5 trainee powers: the power of confidence, the power of moral wrongdoing, the power of moral concern, the power of energy, and the power of wisdom. These 5 faculties arise in him without strength: the faculty of confidence, the faculty of energy, the faculty of mindfulness, the faculty of concentration, and the faculty of wisdom. Because these 5 faculties are without strength, he sluggishly attains the immediate condition for the destruction of the taints. This is called practice that is painful with sluggish direct knowledge. Okay, so here he's talking about a painful mode of getting to enlightenment with sluggish direct knowledge, meaning it takes, more time and kind of more sluggishly getting to this direct knowledge or experience, or ultimately getting to final knowledge or enlightenment. So we've already been talking about these first 5 things that the Buddha is talking about. So residing, reflecting on those. And then he resides dependent upon the 5 trainee powers. The power of confidence. This is having confidence in the Buddha, the teachings, the community, your teacher, and your own ability to attain enlightenment. So you're dependent upon this confidence. You're dependent upon the power of wrongdoing. What this is knowing wholesome from unwholesome. If you have moral wrongdoing, you understand what's wholesome and unwholesome. And you're cultivating that as part of your practice. You don't know that when you first start the path to enlightenment. You don't know what's wholesome and unwholesome. But as you learn and practice these teachings, you gain the wisdom of what is wholesome and unwholesome. And this is called moral wrongdoing. The power of moral concern. Once you have moral wrongdoing, that you know what's wholesome and unwholesome, the power of moral concern is being concerned with causing any harm and not interested in doing the harmful, unwholesome things. So this would be moral concern. So if you do something that you realize, oh my goodness, that was so wrong for me to do, I shouldn't have did that. Oh, I need to change that. That is moral concern. The opposite of moral concern is you do something unwholesome and you don't even care. You're like, so what? I don't care if those people have to deal with that. I'm going to do it anyway, right? Or I have done it anyway. So that's the opposite of moral concern. So if you do something that you realize is unwholesome and you have this concern, that's a really good quality to have, but you're not interested in going into discontentedness where you feel so guilty and so shameful about the things that you're doing. So maintaining the concern is healthy because you're not interested in doing unwholesome things. But if you allow it to divulge into guilt and shame, that's where you can, really kind of spiral out of things. So make sure you're continuously cultivating the moral wrongdoing, that you know what's wholesome and unwholesome, and you maintain moral concern, that you're not interested in doing the unwholesome and you're only interested in doing wholesome. The power of energy. This is that enlightenment factor of energy, that you have enthusiasm, that you have motivation, that you have initiative to do something. And you would like to maintain that throughout your practice. But understand that that's impermanent, that it's going to go up and down until you get to enlightenment. You'll have fully cultivated energy where you can be active all the time and you're never even tired. Of course, you're going to rest, you're going to relax, you're going to need some downtime, but you're not going to be tired and exhausted when you're getting your downtime and your relaxed time, that you're not going to feel like you have these heavy bricks on your feet or your shoulders. So you would like to maintain your initiative and your motivation, but balance that out with periods of time to rest and relax as well. This whole idea of like nose to the grindstone, push, 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 this isn't sustainable. You're going to need to have some relaxed time. And you might need to train your mind how to relax. At least I know I did. That when I moved here to Thailand, I didn't know how to relax. So you're going to need to learn how to maintain your energy and your vitality, your interest and willingness to do something, while also being able to easily relax and rest without being so exhausted and tired. Don't take yourself to the point of exhaustion where you're depleting your energy, because then it's a lot harder to get it back. You would like to sustain your energy long term. So don't take yourself to the point of exhaustion. So if you know anything about the way that I teach for 3 hours in the morning on Saturday at the temple. And then I have a break during the day. And then I start teaching you guys at 9 p.m. at night. And during the daytime, like today, I spent time with my son. We went and got something to eat. We went to the mall. We had a foot massage, which are very inexpensive here. They're about $8 to get a 1 hour foot massage. And I took him to the movies. And this is a way to have some downtime and some relax. And then when we came back home, there was about an hour or so before I needed to start teaching you guys. So you would like to balance out your life this way and all the different things that you're doing. And you might need to work for 6 hours, 8 hours or so, or maybe even longer. But be sure you factor in some downtime as well. And then the power of wisdom. This is having the direct experience to have the wisdom that you've learned, independently reflected, and then you practice. And that wisdom is what you're ultimately getting to. So the Buddha is talking about these as 5 trainee powers. And then he's talking about that these 5 faculties are without strength in this person who's experiencing this painful mode in sluggish direct knowledge, that these aren't in the mind. So you should take this as a mental note that, okay, I would like to develop these things. I'm not interested in, going through this painful mode and this sluggish direct knowledge. I would like to develop these 5 faculties. It's the faculty of confidence, the faculty of energy, the faculty of mindfulness, the faculty of concentration, and the faculty of wisdom. So if you don't have strength of these 5 faculties, it's going to be more painful and more sluggish for you to get to direct knowledge. Then he says, because these 5 faculties are without strength, he sluggishly attains the immediate condition for the destruction of the taints. So that's why you're not interested in doing that. So develop those 5 things. Now we go to the next one. Painful mode with quick direct knowledge or experience. Here, a monk resides reflecting on the unattractiveness of the body, perceiving the dissatisfaction of food, perceiving non-excitement in the entire world, reflecting on impermanence in all conditioned objects, and he has the perception of death well established internally. He resides depending on the 5 trainee powers. So these 2 paragraphs we already know. So here, what's different is that these 5 faculties are with strength. So before, it was painful mode with sluggish direct knowledge. Now we've got painful mode with quick direct knowledge, because he's cultivated these 5 faculties. And now he's just describing those 5 faculties again. Okay, so I'll just go to the next one. Pleasant mode with sluggish direct knowledge or direct experience. Here, distant from sensual pleasures, distant from unwholesome states, a monk enters and resides in the 1st jhana, the 2nd jhana, the 3rd jhana, and the 4th jhana. So this is putting together all those foundational teachings that I share as part of the group learning program and getting the mind to move into those jhanas. That's the first thing he's talking about. That's going to lead to this pleasant mode with sluggish direct knowledge. So now the mind's moving into those jhanas and in those jhanas. He resides dependent upon 5 trainee powers. These are the 5 powers we already mentioned. The power of confidence, moral wrongdoing, moral concern, energy, and the power of wisdom. These 5 faculties arise in him without strength. These are the 5 that we just talked about. So even though the mind's in the jhanas and it has these 5 trainee powers, it's still in this particular mode that is pleasant with sluggish direct knowledge, it doesn't have strength in the faculty of confidence, energy, mindfulness, concentration, or wisdom. So that's going to be more pleasant, but it's still going to be sluggish because it doesn't have these strengths of confidence, energy, mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom. Okay, now the last one. Now this is the one that I'm sure all you guys are wanting to tune into because it's the pleasant mode with quick direct knowledge, right? This sounds something interesting. Okay, well, what's this one? Gotama Buddha, teach us, because this is what you'd like, right? So here he says, here, distant from sensual pleasures, distant from unwholesome mental states or unwholesome states, a monk enters and resides in the first jhana, the second jhana, the third jhana, and the fourth jhana. So it's those foundational teachings that are going to get you there. He resides dependent upon the 5 trainee powers, the power of confidence, moral wrongdoing, moral concern, energy, and wisdom. These 5 faculties arise in him with strength, the faculty of confidence, energy, mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom. Because these 5 faculties are strong, he quickly attains the immediate condition for the destruction of the taints. This is called practice that is pleasant with quick direct knowledge or experience. These monks are the 4 modes of practice. So here, this is what I've been guiding you guys to develop, is develop the foundational teachings to get you into the jhanas, and then this power of confidence, moral wrongdoing, moral concern, and energy and wisdom is what you've also been guided towards in the group learning program and all these other classes. And then the same thing with these faculties that arise with strength. I've been guiding you in cultivating confidence and energy and mindfulness and concentration in the faculty of wisdom, because this is going to be a more pleasant mode with quick direct knowledge. So let me see what questions you guys have on this, if any at all. This is chapter 31, where the Buddha is describing the 4 modes of practice that leads to the elimination of the 10 fetters or the destruction of the taints. All right, I'm not seeing any questions anywhere. So what I'll do then is just invite you guys to attend for the class next week, where we're going to be moving into volume 5. We're going to be starting volume 5, which is titled The First Stage of Enlightenment, stream entry. This is where you're going to learn all the different teachings that you need in order to get to that first stage of enlightenment. In the retreat that I'm going to be teaching this August here in Chiang Mai is based on the first book of volume 1 and this 5th book. So we're going to be going through this book and teaching all the various teachings that you need in order to get to that first stage of enlightenment. So we're going to be going into dependent origination, the 6 sense bases, the 5 aggregates, and even there's teachings in there that help you understand how to determine if you've attained the first stage of enlightenment or not. So you can start reading that if you like, either before and or after class. There's the 10 chapters that we're going to go through next week, and then each week we'll do 10 chapters in that book. And then tomorrow in the group learning program, we're going to be in chapter 18, which is titled God's Creative Action, You Have Free Will. So if you're interested in having a relationship with God and getting to enlightenment, I'll teach you how to do that. But there's certain conditioning of your mind that it might have taken on where you might fear God, or you think God is punishing you or rewarding you, or you think you should pray to God and ask for a whole bunch of things. There's things like this. Even some people think God is controlling the world and everything that happens in the world. So I'm going to help you guys understand how to get to enlightenment if you'd like to maintain a relationship with God. But I'm also going to help you learn how to get to enlightenment if you're not interested in a relationship with God at all. You can get to enlightenment either way, either with a relationship with God or without one, because God's not the one who determines if you get to enlightenment. He doesn't grant enlightenment to you. It's based on your own decisions. But if you have hatred or anger towards God and you don't want to have a relation with him, you're going to still have hatred and anger in your mind. So you're going to need to learn some teachings, whether you would like to have a relationship with God or not have a relation with God, because most likely the things that you've been taught in various venues might inhibit you based on the conditioning of the mind with your understanding of God. It could inhibit you to actually either have a relationship with God and get to enlightenment, or not have a relationship and get to enlightenment. So I'm going to teach you both ways of being able to accomplish that. And then on Wednesday, we're going to be doing breathing mindfulness meditation together. So you guys are all welcome to come to that class or take in the content through the recording, because remember, not only do we do meditation, but it's an open free-form question day for you guys to ask any and all questions that you like about the path to enlightenment. So thank you all for attending today's class. Thank you for the questions, and I appreciate all your dedication and diligence to learning. We'll see you guys in one of these future courses, one of these future retreats, one of these future classes. Have a very lovely and wonderful rest of your day. Sawadee krap.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. To provide support for this podcast, visit patreon.com/support Buddha. To access more teachings, visit buddhadailywisdom.com. There, you will discover a full range of courses, retreats, and online resources to assist you on the path to enlightenment. Remember to establish a daily, consistent meditation practice, along with learning and practicing these teachings. A well-developed meditation practice is the foundation in which to train the mind to attain enlightenment.